Welcome, everybody, to the Meet the EFF panel. Thank you all for coming. We understand that we're up against General Alexander, so it's a tight competition, and we're glad you all decided to spend your noon hour with us. So thanks for being here. So this is the Meet the EFF panel. We're going to go and have brief introductions from each of our panelists who represent some of the EFF folks who are working to defend your civil liberties. Actually, a quick show of hands. How many people here are members or otherwise very close to familiar with the EFF? Okay, thank you very much. For those who don't know much about the EFF, you'll learn a little bit today. We are a civil liberties nonprofit that fights to defend your rights online, privacy, free speech, and innovation policy, try and make the world safe for security research to do their research and talk about it. And we're here today to answer your questions about what we do. We have a great selection of panelists. We might not have the particular person who works on an issue you have a question about, but we'll do our best. And one thing I wanted to say is if you have a question that's specific to some situation that you're in, this is not really the forum for those kinds of questions. One of the things we do is we provide counseling to people who need it pro bono, but this is not the forum for those types of questions because we want to make sure that if you did have such a question, that it was in a confidential, privileged manner. But for general questions about what we're doing, cases we're working on, policy issues, this is the place for that. Before I begin, I just wanted to play for you a short video that we created to support to coders' rights. And this is, well, let me just let it play, and then we'll introduce the panel. Thank you. The production quality is, I understand, not very high, but that's because when you donate to EFF, your money is going mostly to programs and not to video production quality. All right, so let me start off by introducing myself. I'm Kurt Opsahl. I'm a senior staff attorney at EFF. I work on a wide range of issues. Probably the most prominent thing I've worked on lately was representing Matt Inman, the creator of the oatmeal, in a dispute that he had with Funny Junk and an attorney named Charles Carrion. I can tell you a little bit more about that in the Q&A session if people are curious. And let me turn it over to you.
Hi there. My name is Eva Galperin. I'm trying. Here we go. Let's try this again. Hi there. My name is Eva Galperin. I am the International Freedom of Expression Coordinator at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. I think I'm the only member of the international team here, so if you have questions about what goes on in the rest of the world, state-sponsored surveillance by authoritarian regimes and such, I am the person to talk to. Do it.
Hey everybody, I'm Hani Fakouri. I'm a staff attorney with the EFF. My focus is on criminal law, and recently some of the work I've been working on has included some work on cell site location data, and we just recently filed a brief in a Washington state criminal case challenging the constitutionality of Washington state's cyber stalking statute as a First Amendment violation because it covers a lot of protected speech. So yeah, thanks for having us.
Hi everybody, my name's Trevor Tim. I'm an activist at EFF and I do a lot of work on free speech issues and government secrecy and surveillance. So we could talk about WikiLeaks or surveillance drones coming to the U.S. And given that General Alexander is in the next room, we can also talk about our NSA warrantless wiretapping lawsuit that's been going on for 6 years. And just a reminder that actually just a week ago today, the NSA admitted for the first time that they violated the Constitution in a letter to Senator Ron Wyden. So we can talk about that too.
I'm Peter Eckersley. I'm Technology Projects Director. I work on a range of issues from a computer sciencey sort of perspective. The big ambitious thing that our team is working on over the next 3 or 5 years is encrypting the entire web. And we have a few projects that are helping to do that, and we've got a few more in the pipeline. HTTPS Everywhere, the SSL Observatory, Sovereign Keys. So if you have questions about encryption or EFF software projects more generally, you can ask them.
Hey there. My name is Marcia Hoffman. I'm a senior staff attorney at EFF. I work on the civil liberties team, and I consider myself kind of a generalist. I work on privacy, free speech issues. Our Coders' Rights Project, which works to ensure that security researchers can do the awesome cutting-edge work that they do without running afoul of the law. A couple of things that I've worked on recently include our requests to the Copyright Office to grant exemptions to the Digital Millennium Copyright Act to make sure that people can legally jailbreak phones and tablets and video game consoles. I also have done some work on a case that we're handling right now. Our client is a telecommunications company that was the recipient of a national security letter, and we are representing that company in its challenge to that letter and the associated gag order. I also have been involved in a couple of amicus briefs we filed in cases in the past year or so, involving attempts by the government to force people to decrypt data, and the question of whether the Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination applies in situations like that. I know that last year here, there were a lot of questions about that, and I suspect that you may still be interested in that, and I would just flag that I'm actually giving a talk about that topic, only on that topic, in a couple of hours. And so if you have questions about that, you might choose to wait and go to that talk, but if you want to ask questions about that here, that's cool too, whatever.
I'm just going to jump in quickly. 2 other fun topics that people can ask questions about if they want. One is the phenomenon of Apple's Crystal Prison and all the other lockdown devices that we're facing, particularly with modern mobile devices, and what we're trying to do about that. And the other is open wireless networks and encrypting open wireless networks so that you don't have so that you don't have to lock people out of your network in order to be safe from eavesdropping.
Okay, thank you, panelists. And so let's, we can start with your questions. Unfortunately, we do not have a mic for the audience, so I'll ask you to say your questions, and then I will repeat them so that everybody can hear the question clearly.
And those who don't have loud voices maybe want to come up and be close to Kurt so he can hear you.
Well, let's start out with you, sir, in the front row.
About the NSA warrantless wiretaps, how do you know that that's happening? Who's the victim? Who are you representing?
So the question is about the NSA warrantless wiretapping lawsuit, and the question is, who are we representing? Trevor, you want to take that, or I can take it as well?
Yeah, go ahead.
So we have 2 lawsuits related to the NSA warrantless wiretapping. The first one we filed was against AT&T for its cooperation, collaboration with the program. And in that case, it was a class action. So we had a representative set of plaintiffs who were AT&T customers. That was based a lot on some information that a whistleblower provided to us about the Folsom Street facility, which is a facility in San Francisco in which there was a room built into the facility containing a splitter that would split the signal and send one copy of it off to the NSA and the rest routed to its destination. And so these were customers whose communications had gone through that facility. The second lawsuit was filed against the government itself, against the NSA and other elements of the governments that were participating in the program. And in that case, we were trying to get, well, a couple of things. We had this same set of plaintiffs who were saying they were injured by it because their communications had been splintered off, and we're also trying to get a ruling there that what they're doing is unconstitutional, get a ruling at least on the merits of what is done. As far as the question, you say, what's the injury, what's the damages? One of the things that is provided in a variety of the statutes, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act and Electronic Communications Privacy Act and such, are statutory damages, damages that are set by law, where Congress recognized that sometimes damages for privacy violations may be hard to prove, and set that forth in the statute.
And just to add on to that a little bit. As far as how do we know this is going on, after the New York Times reported on it in 2005, dozens of major news organizations reported the same thing, and this evidence has been kind of in the public record for 6 years now. And even after Congress passed the FISA Amendments Act, which is actually going through Congress right now for renewal, which we are strenuously opposing because it really, instead of strengthening privacy protections in the wake of this scandal, it actually weakened them for Americans talking to people overseas. But even after that passed, there's been numerous reports that the NSA is still collecting just purely American domestic communications. The New York Times in 2009 said that they had been doing it still in a systematic way. Wired just reported a few months ago, I'm sure many of you saw, about the massive data center they're building in Utah, which they plan to store basically every email sent around the world. And William Binney, who's actually on a panel here later this weekend, it was an NSA, longtime NSA employee, and he actually just joined our case, one of 3 NSA whistleblowers to present evidence in our warrantless wiretapping case against the NSA. So the evidence is vast, and yet still the government has yet to allow us to present that evidence in court.
You guys did this discovery. Did that give you any more evidence from that?
So the follow-on question is, did we have discovery and to get further evidence from that? And the answer is no, we did not actually get to do discovery. The case, even though it's been 6 years, is still in the preliminary stages. They have, well, there's 2 cases. So the first case was moving forward. They tried to get the case dismissed. That failed, and then went to Congress to get retroactive immunity given to the telecoms. There was a big battle in Congress over that, but unfortunately telecom immunity did pass, and we fought the constitutionality of that and took that to the appeals court as well, but that unfortunately was not successful. I mean, it's flattering when you have your case being specifically talked about at the highest levels of government and they pass a special law just to kill your case. But nevertheless, that doesn't get us any closer to a ruling on the merits. And then the second case against the NSA and the government, the state secrets privilege was asserted. And so we need to resolve whether or not the state secret privilege prevents us from moving forward with the case before we go any further. So we're a long way from that sort of thing. All right, another question. Sir.
I just wondered if you could talk about SSL encryption devices. So hardware devices, it's quite a common feature to have next generation firewalls for an organization to be able to encrypt SSL traffic inside their network, so that obviously, to an ethical level, you're trying to find malware, that type of thing. But what type of legalities are you running into by encrypting these?
So the question, let me just repeat the question. The question was about SSL decryption devices placed onside a network so people can look at SSL communications, perhaps to find malware, but also examining the communications.
So this is I won't say totally common, but it's a thing that a decent number of companies do. They install these devices and then they go around to their employees' machines and add a root certificate they make that a trusted certificate for each of the devices that's on that network. And then every device, whenever it makes a TLS connection, gets man in the middle. The key it sees isn't the true key for the server it's trying to talk to, so it does a handshake with the firewall, and the firewall gets to read the contents of the encrypted communications. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to give you the legal analysis of this, and maybe one of my colleagues will. But I will say that doing this without getting very clear, explicit consent from all of the employees who are affected by such a device is extremely risky.
Okay, and then the sub part of the question was about the legality of it. So there are a number of laws that affect when you can eavesdrop on communications, most prominently the Wiretap Act, which is a federal law. The Wiretap Act requires one-party consent. However, a lot of state laws require all-party consent, and so one would certainly be wise, as Peter is suggesting, to get consent of all parties to a communication before intercepting it. There's also a provider exception that allows a provider to do things to protect their networks, but that would have to be that for someone who is a provider of it. So, I mean, I hate to say it, it's often the case with these sort of legal questions, but it depends, and check with counsel is probably the best answer. I'll take another question. Sir.
Some of these issues like Tor and anonymous browsing, as well as disk encryption, are coming up in court cases that are rather unfortunate, like child pornography cases where the person doesn't use a password protection through child pornography on it. And I'm curious if these cases influence how you profile these issues, and whether you're still fully for these issues in the light of maybe protecting bad people. Is it our obligation to do anything about these people, or is that going to be?
Okay, so to repeat the question is about Tor and other anonymizing technologies, which may sometimes be used by people like child pornographers or other malfeasors. And the question is, does that affect how we feel about the technology and how we react to it?
So from a legal perspective, I think that this is something that comes up in our discussions when we think about which cases to take. Because what we're trying to do on our legal team is try to pick the best cases that we possibly can to create a really good impact in the law that's going to help a lot of people, right? And so, when a case comes up that we're thinking about maybe getting involved in one way or another, and it involves child porn, for example, that's certainly one of these things that we take into account, because I feel that often in cases like that, the judge is really going to want to bend over backwards to make sure that person gets punished, right? And sometimes I think that creates the possibility that the judge is going to bend over backwards to sort of torture the legal analysis to make sure that person gets punished. And we worry that could have a greater impact on a whole bunch of other people that isn't going to be so great. To give you an example that actually does not involve child porn, how many of you are familiar with the Lori Drew case? Anybody? So several years ago, I'll bet you a lot of you read about this. Several years ago, there was this really awful thing that happened where a woman set up a fake MySpace account, imposed as a young boy, and then became connected to a friend of this woman's daughters. And the daughter was all excited that this good-looking guy was into her and all of this. And then the woman basically kind of her fake persona turned on the girl and said all sorts of terrible things to her. And the girl became very, very depressed, and she committed suicide. And it was a terrible, terrible thing. And there were a number of prosecutors who looked very hard at that situation, and I think they thought, you know what, somehow that should be illegal. And they looked into it, and they couldn't really find any laws that they could prosecute her under. And so one prosecutor had this idea that maybe they could use the federal hacking law, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, to go after this woman on the theory that when she signed up for a fake MySpace account, she violated MySpace's terms of service. And in so violating the terms of service, she was gaining unauthorized access to MySpace's servers, and therefore was guilty of violating the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And they pursued a felony charge against her. Now the problem with that is, if that woman is guilty of a crime for violating terms of service, then that's going to be the case for all of us. And you've read these things, right? I mean, or you haven't, and that's part of the problem, right? I mean, you could be guilty of a crime for violating something that you never read and you don't even know what's in it. And of course, that would be a big problem. And so we got involved in that case as an amicus, and ultimately a judge found in that case that it just couldn't be the case that violating terms of service turns you into a criminal. And we thought that was a very, very good outcome. But I think that this demonstrates, at least from our perspective as a legal organization, how difficult it is sometimes to deal with those sorts of things, because you're right. On the one hand, somebody's been accused of something really, really bad, and often it appears that they've done something really, really bad, and perhaps as a society, we say we want to punish that, but we also want to be careful not to do it in such a way that it moves the law in a direction that could affect a lot more of us that are not even implicated in that case.
Eva, do you have something you wanted to add?
No.
Okay. Then I'll take another question. Let me see if I can get somebody. All right, there in the middle, sir.
Yeah, sorry. I come from Spain, and as you might know, the situation right now is quite difficult. We're having a lot of protests, and the government is thinking of changing the law, and not allow us to organize this protest, citizen protest, not riot, protest, using the social media. My question is, do you have any experience helping this kind of situation, and what could we do to protect ourselves from this government?
Okay, so the question is, the gentleman comes from Spain. There are some protests who are organizing through social media, and do we have some experience in helping protesters internationally who are protesting using social media?
Well, the work that EFF does internationally is a little bit different from the work that we do domestically, because we do not have lawyers in every country, so we don't actually litigate internationally. But what we do is we work with activists on the ground in order to help them organize and oppose these kinds of laws, and we work with the organizations that already exist in the country in a sort of partnership in order to give them our support and sort of move our many members towards this issue. A lot of countries have actually looked at criminalizing certain kinds of speech in social media, including the state of Veracruz in Mexico. And I think there's also a similar law in India, and recently there was the Twitter joke trial in the UK, where a British citizen joked about blowing up a plane over Ireland and was taken to court for I think today was it today? Possibly yesterday, that he had been convicted and he went on appeal and was acquitted today. So we do work with people all over the world, and we certainly oppose these kinds of laws and try to draw attention to them when they happen.
Okay, next question. I'll take at the end.
Yeah, just kind of to follow up, could you tell me a little bit more about collaboration between the EFF in the USA and the EFF in other countries?
Oh, there
So
is
let me
no.
just repeat the question and then.
The question is if I could elaborate on the collaboration between EFF in the United States and EFF in other countries. EFF is not divided up by country. There is just one EFF. It's 30-something of us sitting in an office in San Francisco. But our reach is international because the internet is international. What we do is we collaborate with other organizations such as the Online Rights Group in the UK. We work with Nawat in Tunisia. We work with an organization called Global Voices, which helps to give voice to bloggers all over the world and sort of highlight times when they're in danger for things that they say online. We've worked with the Committee to Protect Journalists, and there are many sort of EFF-like organizations all over the world, and we try to encourage their formation and work with them to oppose bad laws in their countries.
There are a few organizations called Electronic Frontiers, like there's Electronic Frontiers Finland, Electronic Frontiers Australia, and those are fellow travelers, but they are not directly affiliated. We don't have they're not branch offices. So I'll take another question. See, in the back there.
How's the current legal battle about banning, throttling, tier internet, that kind of stuff? Where ISPs, where we don't really have much of a choice, are throttling connections to certain websites and that kind of stuff.
So the question was about battles about throttling bandwidth. And where ISPs have ISPs being asked not to connect to certain websites, which I think may be a reference to some of the ICE seizures of domain names, and I guess a reference to throttling of BitTorrent by certain networks. Peter, you want to talk to that part?
Sure. So we did a lot of work a few years back when Comcast, which is the second largest ISP in the United States, started injecting forged reset packets into BitTorrent and other peer-to-peer connections, and also some other protocols that their firewalls just randomly confused for peer-to-peer. So Lotus Notes, I think, was having its connections reset and other stuff like that. So that Comcast back then was doing that very blatantly, and a number of other ISPs were. And we ran the first controlled tests that confirmed that it was definitely Comcast doing this by collecting data from both ends of the connection. And that led to the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, attempting to establish authority over network neutrality in order to prevent Comcast from being able to do this kind of thing. And there's been a huge kind of side argument about whether the FCC has the legal authority to do this and whether they're the right institution to do it. But the state of play at the moment is that all overtly US ISPs have kind of agreed not to do this sort of thing. And they've tended to be sued and run into trouble when they have done it. So if you're aware of a US ISP that is definitely differentially throttling traffic to one domain versus another, that's a really interesting thing to come and talk to us about. Or just draw attention to, and it will just drawing attention to it will tend to get the problem fixed. Because I think that US ISPs are under a lot of pressure not to do this kind of thing. Internationally, the situation's more varied. There are a handful of countries, such as the Netherlands, that have actually passed explicit network neutrality laws. So in those countries, it's outright illegal to do this kind of thing, whereas in the US, it's more complicated. And there are some places where it's more overtly just, okay, we're doing it and getting away with it. And so I think what the internet community needs to do is catch companies that are doing it, draw attention to it, and make sure it stops.
All right, on the edge there with the EFF hat.
How often, if at all, are you engaged by legislatures and your staff during your drafting, and do they listen?
So the question is, how often are we engaged by legislatures and their staff when they're crafting legislation and drafting it? I think I'll take that. Fairly often. We have some contacts in DC. Our main focus for advocacy is more on the litigation establishing precedent side of things, but nevertheless we have had some good communications with some people back in DC over the language of bills. Do they listen? Well, I mean, they listen. They don't necessarily do what we ask them to do. But you know, their staffers will make the time to be on a call with us, or at least some of them, not all. And then we also, from time to time, will get involved at state legislative levels, and also have some of our international team working on things like EU directives and some of the sort of semi-legislation that occurs out in that sphere.
One great story of this sort, there's a big difference between talking to people, which people tend to talk to us. Sometimes they even come to us and then write a bill based on stuff that we tell them, but then there's this whole other question of whether the bill passes and becomes law, and most of the time it doesn't. And then there are times when people in government and in Congress come to talk to us, but don't listen. So a good example of this was Koika and SOPA and PIPA, the various internet blacklist bills, where they came to us and said, we need to censor websites in order to, they didn't say censor, we need to take down these websites in order to enforce copyright law. And we said, no, you don't, that's a terrible idea, you should definitely not do this. And they didn't listen to us, they continued to try and pass those bills. And so then we ended up basically with the giant political campaign that we and a number of other groups ran against SOPA and PIPA that culminated with Blacklist Day, and we won. So sometimes they don't listen to us, but we win anyway.
Thank you. And thanks, I mean, I'm sure many of you were participants in the fight on SOPA, and I think it's worth calling out, and thanks for the claps there. That was a watershed moment in trying to put some sanity into what Congress did. One of the first times where Congress was really coming forward with a really bad bill, and they were being told by the content industry, this is fine. Everyone on the Hill was saying this is a done deal, and the only question is how bad is it going to be? And through massive grassroots support, it was turned around. So that was a really great thing.
And it's important to point out that after SOPA and PIPA went down, they listen to us a lot more now.
Sir, Edgar, you had your hand up for a while?
So what's the current state of encryption keys versus the Fifth Amendment? And what if I simply say, I forgot it?
Okay. The question is, what is the current state of encryption keys and being asked to give up your password and the Fifth Amendment?
So for those interested in this issue, I'm going to speak about this briefly, but I have an hour-long talk about this later this afternoon, and so I don't want to take I don't want to steal my own thunder here and have you all just not come because you're like, oh, okay, I got the deal then.
2 o'clock, right here.
2 o'clock. So this is a really interesting question. Basically, the issue is the privilege against self-incrimination, which we get from the Fifth Amendment, which ensures that witnesses have a right to remain silent and not have things that they say be used against them. And how how that affects attempts by the government to force people to disclose passwords or encryption passphrases, or simply compel them to decrypt data and then turn over a version that the government can then read and use. And there have been a couple of big cases on this in the past couple of years, and I think that the rule that we can see from this new precedent is that if you have a valid Fifth Amendment privilege, meaning the government is trying to force you to make a testimonial communication that would reveal things in your mind that would tend to incriminate you, you can have a valid privilege that keeps the government from forcing you to decrypt your data. However, this can have limits. The case that was decided first this year, basically said, listen, if there is a situation where the government already has a pretty good sense of what that data is, and that you have control over it and custody over it, and it can be authenticated in some other way, then really they're not forcing you to say much more than they already know. And in that case, you might not have a valid Fifth Amendment privilege. So that's kind of the story there. If you want to hear more explanation about it, come this afternoon, please.
All right, another question. In the back, EFF hat.
What, if any, vision does the EFF have on domestic deployment of drones, and what, if any, work do you have on
So the question is, what is EFF's position on the deployment of drones? Is it offensive? Domestic deployment of drones. Trevor?
So in February, the Congress passed a bill called the FAA Modernization Act, and buried in this bill is a clause that says the FAA has to start issuing drone licenses to public agencies, including law enforcement agencies. And the FAA itself estimates that by the end of the decade, there may be as many as 30,000 drones flying in the U.S. And so these drones aren't, going to be shooting missiles, but they will be able to do pretty much everything else that military drones are capable of, whether it's surveillance, flying for hours or days at a time. Some of the drones, the military drones can, scan entire cities, and alternatively, see the color of your shoelaces from a mile away. But they can also be equipped with facial recognition software, fake cell phone towers that can intercept text messages or phone calls, or crack Wi-Fi. Or, a Texas sheriff even suggested that he wanted to put less lethal weapons, he called them, on drones, like rubber bullets and tasers for crowd control. So, the dangers are kind of unprecedented, especially in the privacy area, where, there aren't really laws that protect us against this type of surveillance. When you walk outside your home, you could potentially be followed by a drone for 24/7. So we've actually been working a lot in this area over the last 6 months. We filed a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit against the FAA. They were actually keeping who had the authorizations to fly drones secret, even though if you fly a manned aircraft, the FAA is actually very transparent. They tell you, who's flying it, what type of plane it is, and a lot of details about its how it operates. But they didn't do that with drones at all. So we had to sue them, and they released a list a few months ago that detailed about 60 public agencies that have drones. Now it's about up to 100, but again, that's about to explode because of this law. So actually we're running because the FAA only really told us who was flying them, we don't know what they're using them for. So what we're doing now is we're running a campaign with an open government group called Muckrock, and you can go to their website at muckrock.com, and we're trying to file a public records request with every police agency in the US that either has a drone authorization or wants to get one. So we've already filed with everybody on the FAA list, and we're trying to ask them, what are they doing with these drones? What do they want to do with them? What kind of type of surveillance are they going going to use with them. And then we're also going to ask your local police station. So you can actually go to muckrock.com and fill out the simple form, and they will file a public records request on your behalf, and they'll do all the legal trouble and all the tough stuff. All you have to do is just fill it out with your information and your local police agency's information, and you can find out, hopefully, if they have plans to get a domestic surveillance drone. And so once that we gather enough information in that regard, we hope to take this information and take it to local city councils or municipal governments or state governments or even Congress, so they can pass legislation that can really set up, robust privacy safeguards. So if drones are being used to follow somebody, that they have a warrant first. And there's already a couple bills in Congress going around right now. We don't know how much support they have, but that say generally this idea. And hopefully, our goal at least is to stop this before it becomes a problem, and to kind of have this legislation be implemented before there is a drone flying over every town in the U.S.
All right, thank you. So the follow-up is, are there any private organizations that are on the FAA list?
Not yet. Right now, only public agencies can get drone authorizations, but that's going to change in 2015, according to the bill that Congress passed that I just mentioned. In 2015, commercial entities can start getting drone licenses, so we might start seeing, FedEx flying a fleet of drones to deliver packages across the U.S.
Okay. In the black shirt, fourth row.
I feel like everybody who supports the EFF has sort of a responsibility, acts as an ambassador to others to promote the concepts and philosophies of it. But I find when I'm talking to people who are better off social standing, who are benefit from the status quo, for them, warrantless wiretapping and a lot of things that are happening are tools that help maintain their comfort. How do we engage them and appeal to their personal interests in supporting the objective of the EFF? And what are your thoughts about that? I mean, I wish there was a pamphlet that says, talk to this social group, and we do.
So the question is how to reach out to people who might be satisfied with the status quo, and to speak to them about some of the troubles and why they should be opposed to things like warrantless wiretapping, and how do you communicate with those groups?
So, this is a really interesting question, and I think we saw a little bit of this in January in the U.S. Supreme Court. When in January, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a decision called U.S. v. Jones that talked about the physical installation of a GPS device on a car, and the Supreme Court held that type of installation was unreasonable and in violation of the Fourth Amendment. It held that it was a search under the Fourth Amendment, and because in that instant case that the court was considering, it was done without a warrant, it was unconstitutional. What was interesting about that case was during the oral argument, Chief Justice Roberts, who I would certainly say is a man of higher standing or whatever you want to call it, asked the government attorney in that case whether, under the government's interpretation of the law, if they could install a GPS device on every single member of the Supreme Court's car. To which the government attorney rightfully answered, as they argued in their brief, yes. And naturally, the Supreme Court unanimously said no, and found the search found that the installation of the GPS device was a search. But I think that really kind of captures how we can approach these technical concepts to people who may not necessarily be worried about it. In the Jones case, the defendant they were surveilling was a guy who was a suspected drug dealer, and he ultimately got sentenced to life in prison. This is kind of going back to your question, this is somebody who maybe society may not think really deserves a break. But I think when the technology got boiled down to a way and explained in a way where 9 elderly members of society who are Supreme Court justices, who are pretty highly ranked members of our society, can recognize, like, hey, you know what, it's a bad idea if we let the cops just put GPS devices on anybody they want, wherever they want, for however long they want. That's when change starts to happen. And I think the way that gets done is both through just people like you talking to your friends and talking to maybe like your parents and people of an older generation who may not be as familiar with the technology, and help them explain, hey, you know what, remember how when you put a letter in the mail, you don't expect the post office to open the letter and read it, you just expect them to deliver it? Shouldn't the same thing happen or be true of our email? And I think all of us here, I think we all try to do that. We all try to explain these kind of complicated, or not so complicated, but concepts that are relatively new to an audience of judges and legislators who may not necessarily appreciate them. And I think as that happens more and more, that's where you're going to start to see a change in societal values. Another example, just very briefly, and I'll stop talking, like in the cell site location data, I think about a year ago, I think everyone at DEF CON may know what cell site location data information is, but the general public probably didn't, and you didn't have a lot of major media companies covering it. But in the last 4 or 5 months, we saw, as a result of the ACLU's FOIA request, where they got all this information about it, and as a result of some poking around by some Congress members to different cell phone companies about, hey, how many requests are you getting from law enforcement? When the number came out, and the number that was reported was 1.3 million requests in 2011, and there have been some people who've suggested that number is actually closer to 1.5 million. Once that number comes out and the Wall Street Journal runs an article about it, and the New York Times runs an article about it, and congressional leaders are starting to ask questions, that's when people are starting to take notice. So that's how that change has to happen.
Just to add on to that a little bit, I think a lot of the times the problem is with people that are that wouldn't attend this conference, that may not know a lot about technology or the internet, is the way that the problem is framed. So when they hear things like the Stop Online Piracy Act, they think, oh, that's people downloading music and movies, and we're against that, so we're obviously for this bill. But what they don't understand, just by the title and maybe by reading one news article about it, is how broad the bill is and how it could affect millions of people who have never even thought about copyright infringement, and could censor thousands of websites that could have just gotten caught up in a broad sweep of whether it was the Attorney General or corporations doing the censorship. So I think it's important to kind of explain to people in more detail about how bills work rather than what they're called. Another example is the data retention bill, which actually just got dropped in Congress. The author of SOPA, Lamar Smith, had this bill. It was called, I don't remember the exact name, but it was essentially Stop Child Pornographers Act. So what it would do, it would force ISPs to keep your data for a year or 18 months so that law enforcement could access it whenever it wants. And now, this would have applied to everybody, not just investigations regarding child pornography. So often they use these buzzwords that people will just attach to without thinking much, when in fact they actually affect a far broader group of people. And so it's tough to get past that, but that would be the lesson, is to try to explain to them how a bill works rather than just what it's called or what it's trying to stop.
Yes.
How do you respond to people who think you're all tinfoil hatters?
So the question is, how do we respond to people who think we are all tinfoil hatters? We try and make sure that everything that we do is backed up and sourced and is quite reasonable. I would say, one of the things where this was coming up a lot was in the question of whether the NSA was engaged in massive surveillance. And it was very, very helpful to have a whistleblower who could say that they were actually involved in installing the splitter in a secret room and in the Folsom Street facility. But in the early stages of that, there were some questions as to how we could make that information public. And originally it was all filed under seal. And so there were some awkward times in the beginning where, we were, one of our staffers was on Fox News and was getting interrogated by Cavuto, where's your proof? Where's your proof? And of course we did have the proof, but at that point we couldn't make it public.
Ever experienced
So the question is whether EFF has experienced intimidation or shady experiences, and I mean I have not. I've not had any particular screening problems at the TSA or strange vans outside my house or anything like that. But I guess is anyone?
I've never experienced anything like that, and in fact, I tend to think that just maybe logically, maybe we're even more protected from that kind of thing than other people, because if anybody did intimidate us or try to make us feel uncomfortable, I think that would be a really big press story, most likely. And so I tend to not have worries like that, largely because I work at EFF.
So I was just given the 1 minute warning, so we're going to halt the questions from now, but they will continue in the Q&A session, which I believe is across the hall in a small room setting. So if you have further questions, you can come there. We'll also be around for the rest of the weekend. We have a booth over in the vendor area where many of us will come by to hang out. There's also another booth over at the Hackers with Guns shooting game, so you can support EFF, shoot guns, and see us at the booth there. So we hope to see you all around the conference for the rest of the weekend. And thank you so much for coming. It's been wonderful. We've been doing this for 8 years. Thank you.